to the match. But again, our focus right now is entirely on the Winnipeg Jets. 4-game sweep of the Edmonton Oilers and looking ahead to round 2. And couldn't be more happy to welcome in for the first time on Winnipeg Sports Talk the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets, Paul Maurice, who joins us right now. Paul, thank you so much for doing this, and congratulations. I imagine going into this series, you didn't anticipate that you would be talking about a series that's over after 4 games, and yet here we are. First off, congrats.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, you're right. Like, you go into that series with the team, and they had just a wonderful year, when they really did make great strides in their game. We didn't think it before, and it doesn't feel like it, right? We get through 4-game sweeps, don't feel like that. That was felt like we played 10 games, and it was a grinder, every one of them.
Well, to say the least. And I mean, the difference in each game was about as razor thin a margin as they come. I mean, how would you describe that series? Because listen, for Winnipeg Jet fans for the next 20, 30 years, they'll all be saying, hey, that was a sweep of the Edmonton Oilers. Yeah, but when you dig into it, you're talking about, a very fine line between winning and losing in each and every of the 4 games.
Yeah, and I think maybe if we had an advantage in the series, it was the comfort level in that expectation, right? We go in as the underdog. They've got what's funny about that series is you're not surprised by McDavid and Draisaitl, or Nurse for that matter. And then you get behind the bench, and it happens every once in a while. These guys are even better than you think, right? Like, they are so dynamic every time they touch the puck, and you think every time they come up the ice, they come up with control. And we did a fantastic job of limiting maybe their options in the game, but it still didn't matter, right? They're still going to get those chances, and they're going to get to your goaltender, and Connor was so very, very good, and he needed to be. So you're not sitting through – sometimes you get into a game or a playoff game, and your expectation that something's going to happen in the next 5 minutes isn't really that high, right? But those guys come out, and you're thinking, well, got to pick the right words. But oh, man, something could happen right now because they got the puck. Which made for very, very exciting. The only thing that series was missing was our fans and how much they would have enjoyed
it. Just on the fans, and we've heard that from some of the players. You have these incredible, certainly for Winnipeg Jets in this franchise, historic wins, a huge series, and could you feel the support of people from outside of the building in the community right now? Because it was a very strange situation for people basically at home by themselves or simply with their family and, connecting maybe through social media or something like that because there wasn't any other option. But do you and the team feel the support?
So it's so different. So for those of us, and a big chunk of us were here in 2018, and the program feeds running the TVs throughout the room. So you can see we got 20,000 people standing outside the building before the game even starts. We'll let another 15 in here, and it's just nonstop, right? And you get a coffee in the morning, and that's all anybody's talking about. So you're immersed in it. And then, you can feel it more because it's there, right? You've kind of been through it. And yes, the social media and probably with our families at home, there's even more phone calls because they're not watching the game with people, right? It's everybody that's connected to you is contacting you. It's just too bad. Like, we were talking about it yesterday. What would it have been like for the fan that had season tickets that went to both games, right? So after you totally wore them out with a comeback win in overtime, you brought them back and made them sit through 5 periods of that. There'd have been a whole lot of people not going to work the next day and probably feeling a little bit like we do today. We're still recovering.
Well, I have a feeling that was the case, regardless of whether people were in the building or not. Head coach Paul Maurice of the Winnipeg Jets with us here on Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. I want to talk more about the series, the overtime, and looking ahead. But just before, I want to back up for a minute because it was, obviously a very successful season. For all intents and purposes, you and your team had, basically clinched a playoff spot with about 6 weeks left in the regular season. And then, the final month included a 7-game losing streak, losing 9 of 10. And, I think back to a few very key moments, probably the 6-1 loss to Edmonton, Paul Stastny speaking about where the team was, some of the things that they've been doing catching up. And you on a few times had said, we really hope that this is something that can make this team better and more prepared for the playoffs when it's really going to count. Take us back to maybe the middle of that slump, the 6-1 game, and what was it, or how were you, the veterans, able to kind of turn that thing around and get
Yeah,
going in the right direction, but then still come out for game number 1 almost as if none of that had ever happened? Or did it just make you better?
yeah, it was no doubt it was a fortunate losing streak, if that's how I'll describe it, because it set up all the things that we needed to do to set up. So we were aware that, so you've got 4 or 5 things going on any given night: your goaltender, your power play, your penalty kill, and your 5-on-5 play, those kind of things. And we had all of them kind of slide sideways at the exact same time. And it really made you focus on kind of the 1 or 2 things that would get you back going. And those things, we were giving up an awful lot off the rush. When you looked at the 6-1 game to Edmonton, I mean, that was a critical loss for us, because you didn't even have to explain it to anybody. You could go in and just show them and say, we just can't do this and have any expectation of winning. And then we started working on that really hard, and you could see it coming. And then you also knew that Connor Hellebuck was going to bounce back. It's just he got into a grind with the rest of the team, and that our special teams, Adam Lowry, had been injured. He came back into our lineup. So then a bunch of really kind of key things changed for us. But most importantly, the room just dug in onto 2 or 3 things that we were going to need to do to win the playoffs. And I'm not sure that we would have gotten the focus on those things as hard if we had won 5 or 6 or 7 and gone into Edmonton and be willing to trade chances with those guys and give them just a little bit more room. And then we wouldn't have, we probably wouldn't have beat that team. So it was used well by our veterans. It was used well by our team. It wasn't easy to go through, but there was never a sense of panic, because the one thing I've said all year is I think this is a smart team. I think they have smart veteran leaders, and they can sit on the bench and they can see it on the ice, and they understand what's going on. So you don't have to spend as much time convincing them. So they got it figured out real quick, and we got better where we needed to.
Yeah, and no better example of that than what your top line was able to do, both offensively, but maybe more importantly, defensively. And listen, and we talked a lot about the success that McDavid had against your club in the regular season. We just had Tim Campbell on, and at 5-on-5, they were actually minus for the series, the top guys against your players. And I know the matchup changed a little bit once Ehlers and Dubois came in, and you had an opportunity with the last change to go a little bit more with the Lowry, Kopp, Appleton line. Right. But I'd just like you to talk about the way that top line, Scheifele, Wheeler, and Connor, were able to rise to the occasion. Not necessarily about scoring goals, and they had some beauties in the series, but more in what they needed to do to not be seeing the red light go on behind Connor Hellebuck.
And it was sacrifice. And I thought it was all of game 2. That was as good a game as Mark Scheifele's played here in a very, very long time. And they had some chances in that game to score that didn't go for them, but it didn't matter because their priority 1. We let that matchup happen, and I wasn't pulling that line off. And again, at that time, Dubois just comes in and Ehlers isn't there. So the rest of our group looks different. So we kind of needed that matchup to happen. And they got an awful lot of confidence with their game. And then when we got home, I left that matchup to start game 3 straight through 2 periods, because we had won 2 games on it, and I didn't want to get away from it. And we're also still testing Nick Ehlers to see where he's at. So then we get into the 3rd period of game 3, and it gives you the opportunity to move away from it. But Mark's line in game 2 were the driver in that. Clearly, Connor Hellebuck shut out performance. But in terms of what the players were doing on the ice, they sacrificed their offensive game to play a grinding defensive game, and got real comfortable with it.
Paul, I want to ask you about the blue line. From my perspective, I loved yours on this. Josh Morrissey played the best hockey of his entire year, and a year that was up and down at times and had some unique challenges in this series. Neil Pionk continues to, really, show the world what a quality defenseman he is. And then you have a third pairing of significant contributions from Tucker Poolman coming back into the lineup, and Logan Stanley, who's maybe been one of the best stories of the Winnipeg Jets season so far. We don't know, you can single somebody out, maybe just speak about the defense overall, but the way everyone raised their level of play in this series against Edmonton.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you're right, each one of them is a story. But Josh Morrissey what Josh did was he kind of combined his experience. So if you go back 2 years, He's playing with Jake Trouba at the time. He's still young, but we run him against the other team's best. And that's where he got that experience, and he really excelled. But there really wasn't much of a thought in his mind of anything beyond that, right? He wasn't running a power play. We had Bufflin and Trouba running the back ends of the power play. And now it's changed for him. So what he was able to do is put the two kind of worlds together. He's on the power play unit now. He puts up numbers, and he was able to do what he had done a couple of years ago against the other team's best, play against the best player in the world, the top two offensive players in the world, get that job done. And also that fourth goal is, certainly we talk about the overtime winners, but the fourth goal, the goal that he scores, might be the most important goal in some ways of the whole series, because it gave us a chance to get to a place that would be pretty good. It's overtime. And we really felt game 4, neither team had a whole lot of energy left. And the idea of having to get on a plane, like if you lose game 3, then you're in trouble in game 4. And you get back on a plane the next day going to Edmonton after both teams went through it, then they would have had a huge advantage on game 6. So I looked at the Morrissey goal as kind of the critical goal of the series, which is funny because we have 3 overtimes. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense what I'm saying, but that goal changed the series as much as the power play goal on the Archibald penalty.
Speaking of overtime, we have lots to talk about considering there was 3 of them in this series. I'm wondering, from a coach's perspective, is the job of coaching different in overtime as opposed as it is to, the first 3 periods of a playoff game? And are there things you're looking at or paying more close attention to, like minute by minute shift than you might be in the first 60?
For sure it changes. And what's funny about that is anything that I would tell you that you're looking for that's important in terms of the coach's role didn't happen in the triple overtime game because it was such an unusual team that we're playing. So you're looking to get everybody involved. You want to make sure you get your matchups right, but you got to get these guys off the bench. And they shut their 4th line down late in that game. And you're always waiting for an opportunity. I got to get Thompson. I got to get Lewis off the bench. So I started working Perreault back into the lineup. And normally I would have, but I didn't. And I'm sitting there and going that, they basically put their whistles away, and I thought they did a good job managing the game. The referees, they've got the 1 penalty and the double overtime that was in the stands. So you're thinking, well, what happens now if we take a penalty? And I've got Thompson and Lewis have been sitting on the bench for an hour and a half. So I had Thompson up. The shift after Kyle Connor scores his goal, Thompson was coming out because I had to get him back into the game. So I was waiting for McDavid line to come out, and I was going to run Thompson in behind Scheif on that shift, and then there was no other shift to send anybody out for, so it was good.
Paul Maurice, head coach of the Winnipeg Jets, with us here on Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. Jets awaiting their second round opponent in the Stanley Cup Playoffs after a 4-game sweep of the Edmonton Oilers. Coach, without fans in the building, it was sort of funny, with these huge wins and in overtime, they don't have the crowd shots, so they go to the players. And they also go to the bench. And, we saw a pretty epic Rennie Rancourt-style quadruple fist pump after the Ehlers goal.
Yeah.
I think Greeley Remus is going to show that one up. The Game 5 one the Game 4 one was a little different. It was a lot of hugging because it's over.
Yeah.
I got to ask you, from your perspective, you have the immediate joy of winning the game, but you're still in the middle of a series, and I'm sure your mind immediately goes to, okay, what's next? What was the difference between your reaction and level of relief, shall we say, from the Game 4 OT win as opposed to games 2 and 3 before the job was finished?
Yeah, I think just the overtimeness, like the comebacks are different, right? Like those kind of games take on a completely different level. And you got a job to do back there as a coach, and you're part of it, but you're not any different than the fans about the excitement of your team winning, right? And I don't mean that it's my team as the head coach. I mean, it's my team, the one I'm cheering for, right? So it's exactly like the guy or the girl in their living room that was jumping around, losing their mind. I'm no different than them, right? And then you try to compose yourself a little bit and get off the bench so that you don't get on camera doing that. But I enjoy it. Like you're holding your breath like everybody else, right? God, you want to win so bad, and then it's a comeback. That one's different in terms of where your emotions get to. When you win a game that's in regulation, and it's, even if it's a goalie out situation, you're kind of working right up until the end. You get your next 2 or 3 shifts planned, and you're timing out the rest of the game, so you can almost feel that coming. But overtimes, you don't know when the next shift is, so it's a completely different animal, and it's a whole lot more fun.
Hey, Coach, how different is the play your routine and the way you speak to the players? How often you do from the playoffs to the regular season? And I'm wondering, the last 3 games have all been overtime. What's going on in between the third period and OT, or if you're going to a double OT, are you in the room? Are you talking to the guys in between? Is that the players? Like, what happens? Like, what do we not see when you're going overtime or in between overtime periods?
So nothing would change in between periods from the regular season. I mean, the mentality is completely different because in the regular season, you're molding and shaping, and you're probably grumpier, right? Like you're pointing out the problems and mistakes and kind of. So it's a different feel when you're walking into the room in a playoff game. If there's mistakes being made, it's something you got to fix, right? So you're not calling a guy. You're saying, listen, we got to watch this. They're hitting us in the middle or whatever it is that they're doing that you're not. So it's a different attitude. And if you don't really have anything to say, there's at very least a change in end zones. So second periods, especially against a team like Edmonton, you've got to be aware if they change certain things that they do. So you'll go in and give them reminders, and then just, it's so positive for the most part with your team, with the way they're playing. You're kind of pumping tires and reminding them of, how it's happened. I mean, we beat the goaltender on 3 clean shots. One was a face-off. The other was an outside rush. I mean, both down the right side of the ice, but the puck's in the net because we made a decision to put the puck at the net, not wait for somebody to join the rush, not look for a better play. The puck just goes to the net. So you kind of leave them with that idea. Everybody's a shooter. Everybody's an overtime hero, right? And if it's on your stick, you can be that guy. So you're reinforcing things, and then you're talking about. So I would talk to the team. There'd only be a handful of times during the regular year you don't go in between periods, and that's usually because you had a lot to say on the bench and there's nothing left to say. And those are usually not happy moments. But you're in the room, and then so it'll be early. Like every coach is different when they go in. I go in and around the middle of the intermission to give them their time too, to get back out and talk amongst themselves. And I keep it real short most times.
Paul, just a couple more for you relating to overtime. I won't bother asking about a second round series when you don't know the opponent. Right. I'm sure you'll talk about that at some point when you know who you're playing. But listen, you've done this for a long time. You've been on the bench for a lot of games, a lot of playoff games. Where does that comeback in Game 3 rank with the wildest that you've ever been involved in?
So there've probably been 3 that I would really remember. One of them's Nashville here. We got down, but that was really, really early in the game. And then halfway through the game, we're right back in it. We had a game in Montreal and we were down 3-0 going into the third. Scored early though, and then Mike Therrien was coaching and he was wearing a yellow jacket. All right, so the Habs get a call against them, and Kerry Fraser's doing the game. And Mike gets up on the bench, and he's waving his arms, and he's going ballistic, and Kerry gives him another penalty. And we scored to make it 3-2. Scored. It's funny how hockey works. We scored late. Ron Francis is on the team. We scored late in the third period to tie the game. So everybody's berserking. And it's a little bit like last game. Like I'm on the bench. I've got my third line on the ice for an offensive zone draw. And he changes and he puts his 4th line on the ice. And now I am cursing myself on the bench because I know Koivu's coming off the bench next, which means I can't put my 4th line on the ice, which means I've missed him again. And I've been running 3 lines hard to come back. And we win the face-off. Joe Wasicek wins the face-off back to Nick Wallin, and I think it bounced 3 times, and it got through like 9 bats. But we win that. They called it in Carolina. They called that the miracle on Molson, and then Montreal was never the same team. So we get into that game, and like I really thought after that comeback when there was a chance that we could catch Edmonton here, and this wouldn't be much of a game. But to give them credit, I mean, they pushed, and that's true. Like McDavid and Draisaitl and Nurse drove that team the next night. Like those guys are special players, and we're very fortunate to have eliminated them. And I don't think 4-0 is a proper or fair indication of how that game went.
Coach, this has been so much fun having you on. Sure. Needless to say, everyone in the chat's all fired up. Can't wait to see what comes next. But the final question for you, and this is actually a non-hockey question, but it's somewhat connected to it. So Game 4, you go to triple overtime. I don't know what time Kyle Connor scored, but it was after 1 a.m.
Right.
You come back out, the players speak. You do your media. So you're probably finished at like 2 a.m. You've
Yeah.
still got that buzz from the game.
Right.
Then what do you do? How long does it take you to decompress? Like, what time did you get to bed that night? And did you actually sleep in for once after that game on Monday?
You know what's funny about that is, like, after some of the biggest wins of the year, you get on the bus and it's dead quiet. And you would think we lost, but there's a fatigue that sets in right away. So you sat back in the coach's office and we just kind of stared at each other, right? Like, it was talked about the next day. I got home, it was about 3:15, and my family was still up because they were still, which is, rare. It's probably about 4 o'clock that we went down. And yeah, you know what? We work early here. Like, this is a really early morning job. Like, most of us, I think, get up between 5 and 5:30 and you come to the rink. So, but no, I didn't get here till about 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock the next day. So I did. I don't know if I slept very well, but I slept happy or didn't sleep. It didn't bother me a bit. If I wasn't asleep, I was in a great mood. So it was one of those days. And some nights you can sleep happy and some nights you don't sleep when you're grumpy, but I was in a pretty good mood.
I'll tell you what, we had a whole city that needed a little bit of extra sleep, maybe an afternoon nap yesterday.
Right on.
Coach, congratulations. People are fired up. Can't wait to see what happens in round 2. Really appreciate you joining us. And
My pleasure.
I know we'll have hopefully there's 12 more wins to come. So our friends at Little Brown Jug, we're going to send over. You can have a celebratory one. We'll make sure there's 12 for 12 more W's.
Perfect. Thanks very much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Hey, thanks very much, Coach. There he is, Coach Paul Maurice of the Winnipeg Jets, joining us on Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. And yes, I did talk to our friend Dustin over at Little Brown Jug. They were fired up that the coach was on. And I said, well, you know what I mean? Actually, if we sent over 16, could quickly take down 4 that have already been earned, and then a victory beer for the next 12 wins. Who knows? Anyways, honestly, thanks to Scott Brown for making that happen. It's been a while since I had a chance to get the coach on the program, so I'm very appreciative of it. And to be honest with you, I've got to thank so many Jet fans with us here that have been with us on Winnipeg Sports Talk, because I think if we hadn't had the response and turnout every day of people, wanting us and to join us talking about the Winnipeg Jets, we probably haven't had the incredible guests that we've had so far from the hockey club. So many thanks to roll out after having the coach on